The security vulnerability that Intel patched is a serious flaw that could allow attackers to access sensitive data and run malicious code on the chip. The vulnerability affects Intel Pentium, Celeron, and Atom CPUs on the Apollo Lake, Gemini Lake, and Gemini Lake Refresh platforms. The flaw involves the fuse encryption key, which is a unique key stored in each CPU that is used to generate other keys for various security features, such as the Trusted Platform Module, TPM, BitLocker, and code signing. The fuse encryption key is supposed to be encrypted and inaccessible to unauthorized people, but researchers found a way to extract and decrypt it by putting the CPU in debug and testing modes. With the fuse encryption key, an attacker could bypass the security measures that protect the data stored in the TPM enclave, such as BitLocker encryption keys. This could allow them to access confidential information on a lost or stolen laptop, for example. An attacker could also run arbitrary code inside the Intel Management Engine, a subsystem inside the CPU that controls various functions. This could allow them to install spyware or backdoors that would be undetectable by security software. The vulnerability is especially dangerous because it requires only brief physical access to the device and takes about 10 minutes to exploit. This means that anyone who can get their hands on a vulnerable device could potentially compromise its security. The vulnerability also affects a wide range of CPUs spanning from mobile to server lineups. Intel has released a microcode update to fix the vulnerability and advised customers to update their firmware as soon as possible. However, the update may not be available for all devices or may take some time to reach them. Therefore, users should be careful about leaving their devices unattended or exposing them to untrusted parties. They should also enable additional security features, such as passwords or biometrics, to prevent unauthorized access to their devices. One of the most important questions you might have after learning about Intel's secret security patch is how can you check if your device is affected, and what steps should you take to protect yourself from possible attacks? In this section, we will answer these questions and provide some useful tips and resources. First of all, you need to know which Intel processors are vulnerable to the security issues that the patch addresses. According to Intel's official website, these include 1st, 2nd, 3rd, 4th, 5th, 6th, 7th, and 8th generation Intel Core processor families, Intel Xeon processor E3-1200V5 and V6 product family, Intel Xeon processor scalable family, Intel Xeon W processor, Intel Atom C3000 processor family, Apollo Lake Intel Atom processor E3900 series, Apollo Lake Intel Pentium processors, Intel Pentium processor G series, Intel Celeron G, N, and J series processors. If your device has one of these processors, then you need to check the version of the Intel Converged Security and Management Engine, Intel CSME, firmware that is installed on your device. This firmware is responsible for managing various security features and functions on your device, such as encryption, authentication, and remote access. The security patch updates this firmware to fix some vulnerabilities that could allow attackers to gain unauthorized access or control over your device. To check the version of the Intel CSME firmware on your device, you can use the Intel CSME version detection tool, Intel XMEVD, that is available for download from Intel's website. This tool will scan your device and display the current version of the firmware and whether it is vulnerable or not. You can also use this tool to update the firmware if needed. Alternatively, you can also check the version of the firmware manually by following these steps. On Windows devices, open a command prompt window as an administrator and type micpath win32_deviceguard get securityservice version. On Linux devices, open a terminal window and type cat/sys/devices/virtual/dmi/id/bios_version. Compare the output with the table below to see if your firmware version is vulnerable or not. Firmware version, vulnerability status: 6.x, vulnerable; 7.x, vulnerable; 8.x, vulnerable; 9.x, vulnerable; 10.x, vulnerable; 11.0 to 11.7, vulnerable; 11.8 to 11.21, not vulnerable; 12.x, not vulnerable; If your firmware version is vulnerable, then you need to update it as soon as possible to protect your device from potential attacks. The best way to do this is to contact your system or motherboard manufacturer and ask them for the latest firmware update for your device. You can find a list of some manufacturers and their support information on Intel's website. Follow their instructions carefully to download and install the update. If your firmware version is not vulnerable, then you don't need to update it at this time. However, you should still keep an eye on any new security advisories or updates from Intel or your manufacturer in case new issues are discovered or fixed in the future. By following these steps, you can check if your device is affected by Intel's secret security patch and what steps you should take to protect yourself from possible attacks. Remember that updating your firmware is not enough to ensure your device's security. You should also use strong passwords, enable encryption, install antivirus software, and avoid clicking on suspicious links or attachments. Stay safe and secure online.